Okay, first things first, I have not seen Doctor Strange 2, so if any of this is in the movie, then I apologize ahead of time. I just simply didn't know. I want to say that because we're about 2 weeks out and early press screenings are going on right now because we're doing the press junket for it, or the press tour, as some people call it. So there's leaks and rumors and things like that coming out now, more so than before. And if you guys are interested, we can cover that. I know a lot of you guys try to avoid spoilers early on, but I want to talk about this idea of Galactus. Right, so here's the thing. There's a few things that we're going to borrow from, and we're going to kick this off by kind of focusing on Wanda for a second, because potentially she could kind of be the connection here. Not directly, but indirectly in terms of what she represents. So based on the trailers that we've seen in Doctor Strange 2, specifically the scene where like you have one Wanda who's on her knees that looks like this in like the Scarlet Witch attire, and you have another Wanda who looks like the Wanda from the main Marvel Cinematic Universe, that it looks like every universe has its own version of Wanda. Now, I'm taking that at face value. There are leaks and rumors, but we don't know anything until the movie actually comes out. But let's say, for example, that that's the case, right? That version of Wanda has like her kids and all that kind of stuff, and maybe the events of Westview happened, maybe they didn't, right? That's just one of those things that goes on, that what happens with each Wanda in each universe is just contextual. Who knows how things play out? Maybe she actually did have kids. Maybe some weird thing happened where Vision was turned into a human and they banged and she popped out some kids, and here we are, right? We have no idea how that stuff plays out. But let's assume, for example, just on a baseline here, that Wanda is a universal constant. Let's also assume the role of like the Sorcerer Supreme is a universal constant. Now, let's kind of expand that out a little bit. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one of the things we know from the Eternals films, and really some of the information that came about the Celestials before the Eternals film, is that the Celestials predate the universe. The only way to predate the universe is to either survive from a previous universe or to come into this universe from the multiverse, from like a different reality. Now, we don't really know, right? The only thing we know about the Celestials in terms of like a concrete definition is, according to Erisham the Judge, they're responsible for the creation of everything within the universe itself. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know. I mean, I will say that like Erisham seemed a little suspicious, right? I mean, he seems like the kind of guy that would lie. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but let's assume that's true. Let's assume that the Celestials predate the universe, having come from a previous iteration of the universe or something along those lines. Now, on the surface, we could say, okay, well, this is the Marvel Comics origin of Galactus. That Galactus was a space explorer named Galen trying to understand why his universe was coming to an end. He ultimately never figured it out, but the sentience of that universe, i.e. eternity, more or less, merged itself with Galen, and then he was reborn into the new universe as Galactus, a being that just travels around the cosmos and absorbs the life-sustaining energy of different planets in order to keep himself alive. Why? Because he just does. That's just how it is. So the thing about this is, while that would be the simple explanation to go with, there is a prevailing theory that's been going on around out there that Galactus is actually a rogue celestial, that somewhere along the line he ended up going awry. Now, let's assume, for example, that in Doctor Strange 2, that the Illuminati could make a reference to this, right? And they could say, well, you know, some kind of offhanded remark, there's a lot you don't know, Stephen Strange. Like you don't even know that you have a Galactus in your universe, right? That sounds like something that would happen that like Mr. Fantastic would say, right? That like John Krasinski's Reed Richards, assuming he's actually playing that character, it sounds like an offhanded remark that he would make, because in Marvel Comics, Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four go hand in hand with Galactus. And in fact, you see them with Galactus more often than you see anybody else dealing with Galactus. Like it really is either just the Silver Surfer or the Fantastic Four, or like Thanos beating the crap out of him. But whatever the case is, the Fantastic Four and Galactus go hand in hand. Now, if that's the case, if he says something like that, right? Like, you don't even know you have a Galactus in your own universe, that establishes Galactus as a multiversal constant. Every universe has its own version of Galactus. Not an overly important point, but to the theory about the idea of Galactus basically being a rogue celestial, there's room for this. And it actually comes from something that Marvel Comics recently made. So in Marvel, they released a story not too long ago called Dark Ages. And it was a cool story for what it was. The ending happened like that. It just happened way too fast, right? They wrapped it up super, super quick. It was rushed. But what they introduced in this story was something called the Unmaker. Now, that was not Galactus, and it was not any version of Galactus. Instead, what had happened, for reasons that don't make sense to anybody, that the Unmaker was basically a giant humanoid machine that was created for the purpose of essentially consuming black holes to stop the destruction of the universe that it was in. Because if black holes were allowed to just sort of continue on unchecked, they would ultimately consume everything. Now, whether or not that's True, I don't really know. It's comic books. Who cares whether or not it works? The important thing here is that ultimately the Unmaker was basically defeated, right? He was essentially destroyed with a constant EMP that shut down all power to the Earth, hence the reason why it was called Marvel Dark Ages. Now, let's take that concept, not the Unmaker, but let's take that concept and expand it out, because what ended up happening with the Unmaker is it became corrupted by all the power it was consuming and just started consuming galaxies. It was ultimately locked away in the center of the Earth by the Living Tribunal. So if we talk about that concept of corruption, there is a big wait a minute, hold on, a huge problem with this theory, but I do want to throw this out there to see what you guys think. So let's say that Galactus is a rogue celestial. Let's say that he is floating out there somewhere. Say that every universe has its own version of Galactus, one of which may look more like the one that we're familiar with from Marvel Comics, and one of which may look more like a celestial from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But let's say that in the MCU, that Galactus was quite literally a celestial, right? Instead of it being like Arishem the Judge, it was Galactus the Devourer. And literally what he would do is he would travel around the cosmos, and basically whenever the Celestials showed up on a world and they would judge it, that if they judged against it, Galactus would be sent there. Galactus would basically cleanse the Earth by effectively consuming it, right? Consuming all life-sustaining energy so nothing could grow there. And then in turn, the Celestials would restart the process of creating life on that world. Literally, instead of it just being Esau the Searcher who would use the Power Stone and cleanse the whole planet, then instead, Galactus would do it. But by whatever manner and whatever means, Galactus ended up becoming corrupted. Now, it could be with all the life-sustaining energy that he was consuming. Literally, he just became a guy who hungers all the time. So instead of him being he's powered by the sentience of a universe, and so now he has to consume life-sustaining energies in order to keep himself alive, that what happened is over the course of however many billions of years, he was just consuming the life energies of world after world after world. And it got to the point where it's quite literally out of control, right? Where he's just eating all the time. He just always has this hunger, so much so that it actually started to move into the direction of him consuming worlds that he wasn't supposed to be consuming, because he just had to satiate his hunger. This led to a war or a battle between Galactus and the Celestials, and that ultimately the Celestials won. Galactus was defeated, likely locked away somewhere if they ever wanted, just to establish the fact that he could return, as opposed to them just killing him, because I have a hard time believing that they're going to be like, hey guys, Galactus is in the MCU, or at least he was until the Celestials killed him 10 billion years ago. That would be really disappointing, right? People want to see Galactus now. So basically saying he was defeated, maybe put in some kind of state of hibernation or something like that, right? But basically locked away. And that in turn, the Celestials had to find some method of being able to cleanse a planet. And that's when they basically started using the Infinity Stones. That Esau the Searcher would use the Power Stone, and he would be the one to basically annihilate all life on a planet. Why? Because they saw what happened when a Celestial started consuming the life energies of a world. That led to Galactus. And so instead of them consuming worlds, they would just use the Power Stone to wipe out life on those worlds. And that would basically be it. Right, that would just be the end of it. Now, if Marvel really wants to build on this, they can say that when Thanos blinked out half the life in the universe, that Galactus was part of that. But when Galactus was snapped back, when half the life in the universe was returned by the Incredible Hulk, Galactus woke up. Right, he literally just snapped right up, right? Just woke up out of nowhere. We saw that in WandaVision. There were people who were in surgery, or there were people who were unconscious, and when they were snapped back, they snapped back in a woken up state. And so it's just okay, literally they woke up when they emerged. If that's the case, it makes sense that that would happen with Galactus. I think it's a good way to bring him into the MCU. It's a good way to bring him in there, to say he's always been there. That way you can explain his hunger, instead of just being well, he's from a previous universe where he merged with that universe's sentience, and he's here now, and he's just consuming things, and not really having to worry about why haven't we ever seen him before, right? How come the Celestials never mentioned him? Because literally the Celestials defeated him. And so it was just kind of why would they, why would they think about him, right? It's not as though you shred a document and then you spend your days wondering and talking about it. No, once you're done with that thing, you throw it away and you never think about it again. And that's exactly what happened with Galactus. The Celestials defeated him, and then basically he's been locked away ever since. But now he's back. back. And so I'm curious to see what you guys think, because I think that Doctor Strange 2 is the perfect way to introduce that. Doctor Strange 2 is the perfect way to bring that in. That what it does is it basically gives us this explanation that Galactus is intertwined directly with the Celestials, that he's a part of the Celestials, that there's a Galactus in every single universe, which falls into his comic book counterpart. And then in turn, it's this explanation of like how powerful he is, or where he got his hunger from, why he has to consume things, different stuff along those lines. Now, how you tie into the idea of heralds, I don't really know. And that's one of the big caveats. I mean, it's a small one, right? It's not the most important thing going on right now, but like, how do you tie into heralds? And if Galactus were somehow able to make his way back, what would stop the Celestials from just defeating him again and then locking him away, right? What would make things different now than before? Perhaps because the universe is more populated now, which means that there's more life energies in the worlds that he consumes. So basically he gets a power boost. And so now the Celestials can't necessarily defeat him. In the comics, the reason why nobody ever kills Galactus, or they're not supposed to, the reason why they're supposed to just let Galactus do their thing is because he's part of the cosmic order. It's his role in the universe. In the same way that the role of a black hole is to consume everything that comes across its path, that the purpose of Galactus is to travel around and basically consume life-sustaining worlds. Now, Marvel tried to expand on that in the early 2000s with the introduction of Abraxas, basically saying that like Galactus was the gatekeeper, and so if Galactus died, Abraxas would emerge, and Abraxas represented like the destruction of the multiverse, right? He just represented pure, unadulterated destruction. It was okay, and like ultimately he was defeated, but Marvel in more recent years is just kind of like, it's what Galactus does. It's just his thing. And as comic book fans who love Galactus, we're just kind of like, yep, that's what he does. Is there any real rhyme or reason to the fact that he does that? Not really, but we don't care because Galactus is cool. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section about this theory, if whether or not Doctor Strange would like potentially bring in this idea. There are theories also circulating around out there that the creation, or at least the introduction of Galactus actually comes by way of the meddling of Kang the Conqueror, which I think is really, really cool. That like Galactus is a result of Kang. I think that's people trying to justify Galactus's existence in the same way that people were like, Thanos made Galactus when he created the Infinity Stones, or when he used the Infinity Stones. It's like a backup plan, right? That like he would blink out half the life in the universe, and then Galactus would just travel around the universe and consume life-sustaining worlds, thereby keeping the population in check. That I thought was a great theory at the time. Whether or not it'll ring true, we have no idea. But nonetheless, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.